Relational database technology was invented by a guy by the name of Ted Codd, Dr. Ted Codd at IBM. It's based on relational algebra and relational calculus. It is a very mathematically rigorous form of data management that we can mathematically prove to be functionally complete. And this work was done in the early 70s by an IBM fellow by the name of Dr. Ted Codd. He published his papers, and really based on those publications, Oracle decided to see if we couldn't beat, well, 4 guys, me and 3 other guys, see if we couldn't beat IBM to market with this technology based on the published IBM research papers. And in fact, we did. There were lots of times, especially in the early days, that were very, very difficult. I think the most difficult experience I had was in 1990 when Oracle had its only loss quarter in history. We've been in business for 20 years. Of those 20 years, we lost money 1 quarter, and we had a very difficult time because we had doubled our sales virtually every year for 10 years. 9 out of 10 years, 10 out of 11 years. It was really quite an amazing run. We were the fastest growing company in history. Still are the fastest growing company in history over a long period of time. And suddenly we'd hit a wall. We would reach $1 billion in revenue, and we were having serious management problems all over the place. And the people who were running the company, the $1 billion company, were the same people that had run the company when we were a $50 million company, 1/20th the size. And I had an incredible sense of loyalty to those people who had worked with me to build Oracle. And it was a very painful realization in 1990 that I was going to have to change the management team, that the company had outgrown the management, that people who are good at running a $50 million company are not necessarily, those aren't the same skills. They're just different. Not one is better or worse. They're just entirely different skill set in running a $50 million company than a $1 billion company. And both skill sets are rare and precious. But we needed a different group of managers, and virtually the entire management team had to be replaced. And that means I had to ask people who I'd worked with for a decade to leave. I had to fire people. And that was the most difficult thing I had to do in business, asking a bunch of people to leave Oracle. But I had no choice. I'd have to either ask them to leave Oracle, or everyone would have to leave Oracle, because there wouldn't be any Oracle left. So it was, in that sense, it was a simple choice. It was thousands of people worked at Oracle. They deserved the best leadership we could find, and my primary responsibility was to the company and all of the staff, all of our shareholders and all of our customers, and therefore I had to choose. And if I couldn't make that decision, then I had to go. I was absolutely shocked the way we treated the Iraqis. We were incredibly aggressive against them, and was that really right? Couldn't we have done that at different? I'm being sarcastic, by the way. Of course, we're aggressive against the Iraqis. They were, they invaded Kuwait. They were threatening our oil supplies. They were threatening the world order, and of course, it was the job of our armed forces to defeat the enemy. It is my job to go out in the marketplace and win. And we run ads that compare our products to the competitors' products. We don't lie about that. We just say, we can do this, they can't. We name the competition. It's fact-based advertising, and we say very clearly that that we're faster, and these tests prove it. We're more reliable, and these tests prove it. We're more economical, and so we'll name a competitor. That's considered. That's not terribly, even though the facts are true, it's considered a little bit rude by some people. I don't think it's immoral. I think that we're giving true facts to customers, giving valuable information to customers so they can make better decisions. It is Bill Gates' job to make Microsoft the biggest company on earth. That's what he's paid for. It's my job for Oracle to move from the #2 software company in the world to become the #1 software company in the world. That's my job. That's what I'm paid for. If I'm not aggressive enough in the pursuit of that, if I'm not successful in the pursuit of that, I should be gotten rid of. If the general running Desert Storm is not aggressive enough and successful enough in the pursuit of that goal, he should be fired. The corporation's primary goal is to defeat the competition in the marketplace. I think that my primary function is to have Oracle, is to make Oracle successful, to make it a good and interesting place to work, because we don't want people to leave. People, this is America. People can change jobs, and they'll go, and people like to work with other intelligent and interesting people. They like to do interesting things, Oracle offer, we have fantastic salary scales. I think we're the highest paying company in Silicon Valley. We have wonderful benefits, all of these things. But again, don't mistake any of that for altruism. That is in our interest to retain our employees. Their job, my job, is to build better products than the competition, sell those products in the marketplace, and eventually supplant Microsoft and move from being #2 to #1. That is our reason for being. Oracle is the #1 software company in the world for providing technology to manage information. But we're only the #2 software company. #1 software company for information management, #2 software company overall. Microsoft is the #1 software company. But right now we're living at the dawn of the information age, not the dawn of the PC age. So we're wonderfully positioned to pass Microsoft and become #1. That's my job. Personal computer was designed as a standalone device. There was no internet around 1981 when the PC was invented. There weren't a lot of local area networks and corporations and schools and government agencies back in 1981. The world has changed. There are networks everywhere around the world, in offices, in schools, in major government institutions. So why not have computer networks that are similar to television networks or telephone networks? A television network is enormously complicated. It's got satellites and microwave relay stations and cable head ends and recording studios. And you have this huge professionally managed network accessed by a very low cost and simple appliance, the television. Anyone can learn how to use a television. 97% of American households have televisions. 94% of American households have telephones. Telephone, again, a very simple appliance attached to an enormously complex, professionally managed network. Why shouldn't the computer network be just the same? I decided to go in the computer business in college. I started working part-time programming. I found it in a very short period of time I could make more money writing programs than a tenured professor at the University of Chicago was making. And I was a teenager. And I said, this is kind of cool. And it was also fun. It was like a big game. It was like working on puzzles. So I enjoyed it. It paid extremely well. I could work at home. I could work at my own hours. No one quite, and the computer, and I closely associated with computers because they were absolutely a slave to reason. They knew nothing about fashion. They were completely logical, and I enjoyed spending time with them. So I liked what I was doing. It was very profitable. It was very creative, and it was also giving me immediate feedback. I could start writing a program, and within several hours, I could have a result. Freud defines maturity as the ability to defer gratification. And the great thing about programming is you don't have to be mature at all, because you don't have to defer gratification for more than a few hours. You get wonderful, tight feedback, and it's a lot of fun. That's characteristic, by the way, of games and sports. The reason why games and sports are so popular is because you win or lose very quickly. You get immediate feedback. It's a very tight loop. You don't wait hours or days or years before you find out if you're winning or losing. You find out a second and a half after you release that basketball, you know whether it's gone in or not. It was in school, and they noticed when I was writing programs for school that I was getting done faster than everybody else. So they offered me a job. And I figured out very, very quickly that rather than being paid by the hour, I was much better off being paid by the program. So I figured that. So I was working for the university, and then I started doing consulting for local businesses. and that worked very well. I don't think my personality has changed much since I was 5 years old. I think, as I explained to the kids just a little while ago, uh, probably the single most important aspect of my personality, and as far as determining my success, has been my questioning of conventional wisdom, my doubting of experts just because they're experts, and questioning of authority. And while that can be very, very painful in terms of your relationship with your parents and your relationship with your teachers, it's enormously useful in life. I was adopted within my own family when I was 9 months old. I was born in New York City. My mother was 19. She wasn't married, and really was unable to care for me. I tried until I was 9 months old, and then I was adopted by my maternal aunt and uncle in Chicago, and moved to Chicago, the south side of Chicago. I'll never again complain about a bad neighborhood, moving from the Lower East Side of Manhattan to a still worse neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. So after my 9th month, I kept my mouth shut about the neighborhood. I believed until I was 12 years old that I was not adopted. I had no idea that I was adopted within my own family. So again, I don't attribute very much of my life, my personality to my adoption. I do attribute it an awful lot to my relationship with my father, who was a Russian immigrant, came here, was very, very poor, dearly loved this country as only an immigrant can, loved our government as only an immigrant can. He was a pilot in World War II, bomber pilot. He really had the philosophy, my country, right or wrong. He never questioned the government's policies, never questioned authority, and didn't really want me to question authority. I had some teachers when I was very, very young that I thought were telling me things that weren't true, and when I tried to ask questions, they basically wanted me to respond, parrot back what they said. They really weren't interested in a discourse with a child or a debate with a child. They said this was true, and you are smart if you can repeat it back to me exactly what I said to you. And I had a real problem with that as well. So I had very strong authoritarian figures both in school and at home, which served as wonderful examples of how not to be. My mom was supportive, and I had a mixture of teachers. Some of the teachers were wonderful, and some of the teachers were awful. But the awful teachers served a good purpose in terms of being a bad example. All examples are good. Bad examples are useful. Good examples are useful. And it taught me to question experts, to question authority figures. Don't assume just because they're an authority or even just because they're an expert that they're right. In other words, think things out for yourself. Come to your own judgments. Don't simply conform to conventional ways of thinking, conventional ways of dressing, conventional ways of acting. That a lot of things are based on fashion. Even morality at times is based on fashion. It was once slavery was once not considered not to be immoral. People are shocked that the ancient Greeks had slaves, that we had slavery in this country as recently as 130, 140 years ago. So there are moral facts. You have to really go back to first principles and think things out for yourself, whether they're scientific principles or moral principles or business ideas or product ideas. You have to think things out for yourself. Well, I don't know if you watched the movie Independence Day, but the discourse between the father and the son in Independence Day, where the father said the government knows everything. The government has experts for everything. If they want HBO, they'll call you on it. Again, I don't know if you saw this, but I think it's this notion that we really can't understand, but the government is always right. We really can't understand, but our teachers are always right. We really can't understand, but our clergymen are always right. And just use them as your sole beacons in life, and don't try to figure these things out on your own because you really can't. You're not smart enough, and just find the appropriate experts and follow their light. I think we're born slaves to reason, and it's really reason that's beaten out of us through a process of trying to please our teachers. I think we have two fundamental drives in our life. We want to be loved, and we want to please people. And we know how to think, we know how to reason. And these are often quite at odds. because we're asked to believe certain things, believe certain things are correct. That we have to wear our hair a certain length and dress a certain way, and if you want to be loved, you want to be accepted by your peers, you want to be accepted by your family, and there's a tension there, and sometimes we're pleasing our parents, sometimes we're pleasing our peers, but we're often just conforming to some fashion, figuring out what the group wants from us, and then conforming to that because we want to be accepted and loved. There's this other fundamental drive inside of us where there's often tension between the two, and that is the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to come to conclusions as to what works and what doesn't, what's fair and what's not fair, what's right and what's wrong. And when fashion and the pursuit of love is in conflict with reason, too often, fashion, the pursuit of love, wins. In my case, it didn't. I did not give fashionable answers to questions. And that's why, and that's what shocks people. Because when you ask a question, you expect everyone to answer it exactly the same way. In fact, you really don't need to ask the question because this is the fashionable answer. And and whenever you give an answer that you think about it, your own answer, what you really believe to be true rather than the fashion answer, people are sometimes shocked, amused, or even horrified, depending on the question. I don't think it's paradoxical at all. I think they're similar. I think we as human beings are endlessly curious about ourselves, and we love to test ourselves constantly. We find all sorts of arenas to test ourselves in, and you can right now I have a racing sail. I have the fastest racing sailboat in the world, maybe the fastest racing sailboat in history. Sayonara has raced 26 times. We have 24 firsts and 2 seconds, and I'm discovering all sorts of things about me as I race that boat. I discover all sorts of things about me every day as Oracle competes with Microsoft for supremacy in the software world. So there's a wonderful saying that's dead wrong that says, why did you climb the mountain? I climbed the mountain because it was there. That is utter nonsense, ludicrous, and absurd. You climbed the mountain because you were there, and you were curious if you could do it. You wondered what it would be like. You wondered what the view was from the top. And that's how we explore. The thing that we're most interested in is exploring our own limits and exploring our relationship with others. We're much more interested in each other and ourselves than we are everything else. I think there are two things important in life, and that's self-discovery, learning about yourself and your relationship with others. And I spend my entire life in those two areas. So, balance is interesting. Play versus work. What is play? What is work? Define it to me. Is work something you get paid for and play something you don't? I put a lot of work into my flying. I put a lot of work into my sailing. I used to play tournament chess. I put a lot of work into that. And they were all forms of exploration. I put a lot of work into my career, into my job, where I get paid. But they're all kind of in pursuit of the same thing, in pursuit of just self-discovery and discovery of my own limits. And an accumulation of world experiences that give me a worldview. The best thing about my life is the people I get to meet these days. If there's any advantage in celebrity, it is you get to meet absolutely wonderful and fascinating people. Walter Cronkite and I went out sailing on Sayonara, and I've known Walter for a while, and we went from being casual acquaintances kind of through business to being friends. And he's just an extraordinary man who's lived an extraordinary life, and I could sit for hours listening to he and his wife tell stories. I can give you lots of examples of wonderful people I've met. One of whom is here, Michael Milken, a man who was actually singled out as the symbol of evil, of greed of the 1980s. This is one of the most humane and gifted men I've ever met in my life. Michael has raised more money for cancer research than any other human being on earth. Michael has been dedicated to education for 20 years, and because of someone's political advantage, they decided to put him in jail for crimes that no one before or since has done. And it's not terribly fashionable to to be a huge supporter of Michael Milken. I mean, I'm honored to have him as my friend, I think he has made incredible contributions to humankind already, with a lot more coming up. But it's a long list of wonderful people that I've met and wonderful relationships that I work at that has enriched my life. And I suppose therein, and I think therein is the balance. There's a balance between self-exploration and building relationships with others, and that is, that's what are the important things in life. I think Winston Churchill has a wonderful quote, which is, "You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give." I think we live. If we live intelligently, we devise a strategy to intelligently pursue happiness. And there should be a book saying the intelligent pursuit of happiness, Hitchhiker's Guide. But there isn't such a book. But there should be. And I think more than anything else, that's what all of us need, is this guide to how to intelligently pursue happiness. I mean, Jefferson guaranteed our right to do it, but he didn't give us a map. And I think we should think of altruism, giving, as a strategy for happiness. Forget whether the morality of it all, that's the right thing to do. Instead, think of it as something totally in your self-interest. If you can help others, you will feel great. The more you can help, the more intelligently you can help, the bigger lever you can get on the world to make it better, the better you will feel about yourself, the more joy you'll experience. That is the road to bliss. That is the intelligent pursuit of happiness, and that is what we should do. That is my argument for giving, not simply that it's the right and moral thing to do. It happens to also be that, but I don't find that as persuasive. That is the road to happiness. The most deeply afraid I can remember being was once my mother came. I guess I was 5, and my mother worked. No, I think I was a little older, because I might have been 6, and I went to school, went to preschool, went to school, and my mother came home very late from work, so it was 6 o'clock, so no one was home, and I was very worried that my mother wouldn't come home, and I was deeply afraid. That's the only time I can remember being deeply afraid. So I was making all sorts of deals with God if he would return her to me. There's a mild degree of fear. There certainly is fear. I mean, fear. Sociobiologists will tell you that fear is the prevalent human emotion. Fear is the dominant emotion in all of us. But your expression was deeply afraid. I certainly feel a little stressed if I'm in a brand new. I just bought a jet fighter and I was flying it for the first time. And if we're flying very low to the ground and doing aerobatics very low to the ground, it's I wouldn't call it fear, but it's a little bit of a rush, and it's kind of mild fear that goes on. That gets the adrenaline going, and I thrive on that. So I like that's a pleasant. I don't know if you want to call that fear, but that's a somewhat pleasant experience for me. That makes me a little bit odd, but extreme fear, no, is awful, but mild, out on the edge a little bit, where you have a mild sensation of apprehension and concern, is something I actually enjoy. We're constantly testing ourselves. We're trying to understand our own level of competency, our ability to control our own world, the ability to put ourselves at risk and then save our own lives. So I think, again, this is a form of test. There's always an element of risk when you're risking your ego when you play in a chess match. You're risking your ego and sometimes your life, depending on when you're doing certain kinds of flying. But in fact, I'm overemphasizing. I mean, I really don't think I do things that are endanger my life when I fly, or endanger my life. I mean, we were in a very nasty boat race from Sydney to Hobart. We were in a storm for 14 hours, but I really never felt like I was going to die. Sometimes I felt like I wanted to die because literally everyone on board got pretty sick, including, and they're all professional sailors. It was a horrible storm, and you had a lot of professional sailors were puking. But I never really felt the same kind of deep fear I felt as a child. I think most overachievers are driven not so much by the pursuit of success, but by the fear of failure. Uh, but again, unless failure gets very close and very nearby, that fear doesn't reach profound levels. But it drives us. It drives me. It drives me to work very hard. It drives me to make sure that my life is orderly, that I'm in control of my company or in control of the airplane or boat or what have you, so that I'm not at risk of failure. And whenever I feel even remotely close to being at risk of failure, I can't stop working. There are an enormous number of people in the world who really want standard answers. They want everyone to wear their hair the same way, everyone to conduct business the same way, everyone to dress the same way, everyone to go to the same church. There's a very, and if you wander outside of these norms, people are highly critical because it's threatening to them. Because they're living their life one way and they believe that's the proper way to live their life. And if you live your life a different way and you answer questions differently, that makes them feel very uncomfortable. And they say, well, this person's different from I am, and then they have to say, then they simply go a little further, and they say this person's different and wrong, and I'm different and right. And so people have been, very, 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 very critical, and people will be critical of you if you do things a little bit differently. It takes a certain amount of strength not to succumb to fashion. I try to think things through, and I try to always ask two questions about my personal policies in life. Are they fair? Are they morally correct? And do they work? So I try to reason things back from first principles. I try to think about things and come to conclusions and make my own decisions. And if other people if I've thought things through, if someone has a logical criticism and can explain to me why what I'm doing is wrong, and they can convince me, I'll change. If they really can, if they have good reasons, I'll just alter my behavior. I love it when people point out I'm wrong, explain to me why I'm wrong, and I then change. That's great. I don't want to be wrong. I would love to be right. And if I am wrong, I love it when people stop me. But if people just throw labels at you and throw criticisms around that are not rational, again, they basically call you names. You can't change your behavior that you think is right just because someone's calling you names, and it's not not the conventional way of behaving. Most of the time, I let it go. Sometimes people have a way of saying things that are so hurtful and so offensive, or say things that are just patently untrue, that I feel like I have to defend myself. So if someone says something that's factually in error, they just said, Larry did this, and I didn't do that, then I'll defend myself. But if they say, if it's just calling me a random name, then I forget it. I think academic success is an advantage. But it by no means assures success in business. I think if you're an outstanding student, you're probably going to be reasonably successful in business. You might not be amongst the most successful people in business or even in science. The straight-A students sometimes are, there's no doubt that they have talent. Maybe it would be better if they gotten straight A's in math and physics, but flunked a sociology course where the professor was just awful, or got a C in a sociology course where there wasn't a need to always please, always do well, even if it didn't make sense to do well and put in the effort. So it's very interesting. So what you look for, at least what we look for when we're hiring people, are people that certainly have a strong aptitude in mathematics and in physics and in music, which is very highly correlated to mathematics, but also people who make judgments as to where they're going to invest their time. Wonderful story about a young man who was near the top of his class at Carnegie Mellon and quit the week before he was going to graduate. And without going into all of the details, it was that interesting judgment that he made, that he was just going to bail out, that set him apart, strangely enough, from a lot of the other very top grads that we have hired. He makes his own decisions, and that's a very useful thing. And I think corporations need a combination of people who hopefully all the people are talented. Some are people that really want to please and are easy to manage. Others really are kind of driven, to their, to a drummer only they can hear, and they will constantly question my wisdom, and won't be the least bit shy about challenging me, and hopefully keep me from making mistakes. I think learning how to program is a wonderful discipline. Again, computers are unforgivingly logical, and they'll do exactly what you tell them. And it's just a wonderful, again, it's a wonderful training to learn how to program a computer. So I would encourage people to take this up. Very much, it's much more important than handwriting. I just finished Vincent Cronin's book on Napoleon, a man who definitely needed better PR. They just spun Napoleon very badly with proper PR people. Napoleon was codified the laws for the first time in Europe. He was constantly eliminating kings and other tyrants. He opened the ghettos and stopped religious discrimination. He was an extraordinary man. He wrote a lot of laws himself. He was incredibly polite, generous almost to a fault. A remarkable person who was vilified. Really was vilified by who? The kings that he deposed. So the kings were not thrilled. The kings of England, and the old king of France, and the kings of Prussia, and the Tsar of Russia, were all threatened by this man who was bringing democracy. And I think it's interesting to read this book and look at Napoleon and see how history has treated this man. There's even the expression, he's got what is it, a Napoleon complex, or Napoleon. Napoleon was of average height for a French person. The idea is not, it's just preposterous. Treating maybe the most gifted man of the 19th century as some kind of despot. He was a liberator, a lawgiver, and a man of just incredible gifts. And he never considered himself a soldier. He considered himself a politician, though he's probably the greatest soldier, the greatest general, perhaps in all history. And I think it's interesting to read about him for a couple of reasons: to see what one man of modest birth can do with his life, and to see how history can distort the truth entirely. And the job of historians is often just that, to distort history, because history is based on fashion. So we constantly change America. We're changing American history all the time. And whatever is politically fashionable, the school districts decide that they want to emphasize this person in history and de-emphasize that person in history. So we're constantly rewriting history all the time. And it's interesting and illuminating to come to understand that even history is based on fashion. Even morality, popular morality, is based on fashion. Real morality is based on reason. And never make the mistake between the two. The opportunity in this country is astounding. Everyone who works hard and maybe a little cleverly has the opportunity to make almost anything possible. And that's the American dream, that anything here is possible. We are not held back. That immigrants come here and in a single generation do extraordinary things. That this country is not perfect, but compared with every other country in the world, it's absolutely fabulous. And there is unlimited opportunity. It requires hard work. It requires a little bit of luck. But still, in America, anything is possible.